So the first question is, where are we 2 years after Helene and Milton, and are we where we need to be? Craig, I'd like to start with you.
Well, I think in some ways, we're worse off than we were before, primarily because the legislature passed this bill, Senate Bill 180, that ties the hands of local governments and says they can't make people build in different places than ones that got washed away during the storms. So folks who suffered the worst possible disaster now are having to deal with the fact that their citizens can't be benefited by the knowledge that they have about that. They have to build back in the exact same place they were at before.
George, when you've done these documentaries, you're out filming with the builders, filming with the insurance adjusters, with the public adjusters, with the family. I mean, where are we? Have we made the progress that you'd hope we would make after 2 years almost?
Well, I guess the answer would be no. You know, we were handed a huge lesson with back-to-back hurricanes. So the question is, what did we learn? There are some people who are just fixing their house and moving back in. There's some people that are raising their house. There's some people who had to sell for 50 cents on the dollar. And then there's other people that are still living in trailers in front of their house. So I think when you look back, the victims probably learned the hardest lesson because most of them are probably still not recovered, and some people never recover. The person that lives right next door to that person that had nothing now feels invincible, and they don't do anything. So it's a hard lesson and a slow learning process for everybody.
Abigail, you've talked about the different aspects of policy that have made things harder, and you focused on the issue with contractors coming in from other states or not being allowed to. Can you explain that to our viewers?
Sure. So one of the things that I think people don't appreciate is that all of the policies that we have, even though they might be well-intentioned, have unforeseen cost. So one of the things that's really slowed the potential for Florida recovery has to do with our relatively really strict laws related to out-of-state contractors being able to come in and engage in their trades, whether we're talking about plumbing, HVAC, or home construction. And Florida actually has some of the strictest laws related to disaster response. And so there are some very clear, I think, policy avenues that we could explore for future hurricanes that would allow us to build back better and build back faster.
Let's talk about insurance. In terms of the insurance industry, we are seeing some positive signs. Citizens Property Insurance has shed over 540,000 policies. It is supposed to be the insurer of last resort. We've got at least 17 new insurance companies coming in to the state. How do you all see this situation? Is it an illusion or is it real progress being made?
I would go with it's an illusion until you see it work. And what happens with insurance, it's a false promise by a company that they're going to take care of you and be there for you when you need them. And to a victim, when it doesn't meet that standard, that's life-changing for them. And their goal in many cases is to find ways not to pay you. So it's a risky contract. If your only plan for survival is having insurance, it's a gamble.
Talk to us about the economics of this whole process with insurance and restoration and renovations.
Yeah, so we've certainly seen stabilization in the market for insurance, at least when it comes to competition. So what we were seeing prior to the hurricanes was we had a lot of insurers who were exiting the state, which saw, of course, people moving to that insurer of last resort. With these new companies in the game, we do have a reduction, actually for the first time in a very long time, in prices. But there's a real question here, as was just mentioned, about how well these insurance companies will potentially perform. But this also doesn't address the issue of affordability. So even though premiums may be mercifully coming down, there's still some of the highest rates in the country.
Craig, how do you see this whole dilemma of the insurance?
Well, I mean, as a customer, it's a headache because not only is the home insurance price is high, but the car insurance as well. I mean, we're getting a double whammy here from this stuff, and the legislature doesn't seem to be inclined to help at all.
When we're looking at innovation, what would you say are innovations that you've heard of that are working, that you're happy are in place? George?
Well, the best innovation for me that seems to be the safest is everybody built like they do in South Florida with concrete homes on the first and second floor, and even the third floor. That's a huge thing that I think everybody should think about. But we see now huge apartment complexes around Tampa. We were up in Mexico Beach, all made of wood. Only the stairwell and the parking garage is concrete. That's crazy. There's no disclaimer on the side of the building that says this is likely going to go airborne in a disaster, but people live there thinking they're safe because it's a big building.
Explain to our viewers what happens when a home has the second story made out of wood and when it has concrete.
As the house ages,
Cement
if it's
block.
wood, it gets compromised. When there's cracks, it now gets in and rots the wood, so that's now a weaker area of the house. You also have the problem of the way the house is engineered and the safety. When things blow into wood, they go right through it.
And Abby, you've talked about the financially, no one is really being, I guess the question is, what incentives financially can we give so that the innovative products are being used?
So certainly there are different options here. So one potential option is to legislate that certain materials or certain codes be followed. But one of the things that we often find is that minimum code compliance doesn't translate to climate resiliency. And so for a lot of people, this is an individual choice, which of course is informed not only by things like budgets, but also the information that people have available when either they're rebuilding or potentially looking to buy a home. And those differences in information can make a really big difference. Again, potentially if people know what they're looking for when they're buying or constructing a home, but then of course has potentially very large implications on the back end if say you buy a house and you're not informed and then you're stuck with the result.
Yeah, Craig, is there an innovation that you've said, this is a good thing?
I don't know if I'd call it an innovation, but last year the legislature did one really good thing, which was they finally said if you're selling a home that flooded, you have to disclose that to the buyer, which it's crazy that that was not required for sellers, but thank heavens it now is, because an awful lot of flooded homes are back on the market now.
Go ahead.
I think people need to understand if you're buying a house and the builder says this house is built to code, what they're really saying is I built this house to the minimum standard I could get away with to sell you, so it's now your problem. Built to code is not thinking forward. It's not thinking to the future of what's coming your way.
Well, I'm going to borrow your title for one of your documentaries, Built to Last, right? And let's talk about the building standards. Are we building things to last?
I would say no. I'd say we see too many examples of that. When anybody buys a house, the builder should have the mentality, they may be living in this house for the next 30 years. This is their happily ever after, forever home. The problem is now that workers are being paid by the job and not by the hour, the incentive to stay there and get things right is no longer existing. They want to go on to the next job because they make more money. That's not in our best interest as the buyers of that property.
Abby?
I think there are some real political economy issues here too. So when we look at kind of recovery after a disaster, people sometimes confuse building with resiliency. And so one of the things that we're seeing, and this is as a result of both state and local level policy, is there's a real incentive to just rebuild and rebuild often in the same spots that were really prone to damage and have suffered damage sometimes multiple times. The unfortunate part is that the cost of that gets spread out over time and also across many, many more people. And so you have this kind of perfect storm of perverse incentives, which means, again, we build back, but not necessarily better.
Craig?
Let me just mention that if you're buying a home on one of Florida's barrier islands, that's a really bad idea. And you should ask, what's the evacuation time from here? Because as we learned after Ian, Lee County had an evacuation time of 96 hours from the barrier islands, which is crazy. That's 80 hours more than it should have been for a Category 5 storm, but the state was letting them go through with that, and the Lee County attorney observed that, oh, there's 45 other counties with the same problem. So that's a recipe for disaster right there.
So the accountability, who is accountable when,
nobody at this point.
when we're not building to last?
You have to be your own best advocate. I tell people in our film, you have to look out for yourself because nobody's looking out for you. So you have to ask a million questions, either of the seller or the builder. I have a list of questions I give people because you want them to almost not like you because you're asking so many questions, because those things matter, and they matter to you, and they're going to matter when you try to unload that house on someone else. So you have to be a detective, you have to ask a lot of questions, because if you don't, no one's just going to hand you the answers.
I see both of you nodding your heads in agreement.
Yes.
As a victim of Hurricane Helene and Milton, I'm nodding my head too. You definitely have to. So where do we go from here? What should happen next when you look at policies and decisions that have been made? If there's one policy that you think should be changed or should be amplified because it's working, what would that be? Craig, I'd like to start with you.
I think the legislature should repeal Senate Bill 180. There are a whole bunch of local governments now suing to try and overturn it because it handcuffs them from trying to do anything constructive from what they learned from the storms. And the sponsor, Senator Nick DeSegli, said he would be okay with repealing it, and then they didn't repeal it. So I think the onus is on him to make sure that happens.
Right. Abigail?
So for me, I think a very obvious point would be looking at and reassessing the disaster provisions when it comes to licensed out-of-state contractors. And of course, what we don't want is an influx of unqualified people who are not doing appropriate work in Florida, again, after people have just suffered from, oftentimes really devastating losses. But there are things that we could very practically do, even if it's something as simple as having contractors in, say, Alabama or Georgia register with the state prior to, say, a hurricane season, so that just like when we see the linemen from out of state ready to come in and help after a storm has passed, we see the same thing for plumbers, HVAC, and home builders.
George, what policy change do you think would be best?
I'd like to see houses tagged with a rating like cars are, a 5-star rating, a 4-star rating, a 3-star rating. Brand that house with what's there. What are the features that make that house safe for people to live in happily ever after? We're not telling people, and they're making mistakes. So sometimes you have to help people along. And it's unfortunate for the person who gets tagged with the bad rating, but you got to look forward with this. You can't just say, well, I got to protect people with bad houses and let them pass it on to someone else.
In one word, your advice for this year's hurricane season.
One word?
Yes.
I would say run. No.
2 words.
Be careful.
Be careful. Abby?
Prepare.
Yeah, just be ready. I think that's the thing.
Yeah, that's the word that I was thinking. Be ready.